All right, well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first ever virtual Masonry in the Green Transition Conference. We're certainly happy to have everyone on this morning. We've got a day full of great content for you. So welcome. As for just a few housekeeping issues, as I mentioned previously here, we will be using a number of Zoom's virtual features to kind of moderate the discussion and the questions that are going on. We certainly encourage all of you to ask questions and engage in the chat and Q&A sections as we go through. We certainly do want you to talk as well. So if you do have something to say, please feel free to use the raise hand option and we can unmute you to either ask questions or provide comments throughout the conference today. So thank you, and let's hope everyone enjoys this conference. It's certainly something that's very important, and in my opinion, will be the driving issue, not only for kind of the global space over the next decade or two, but certainly the masonry industry as well. So quick shout out to our sponsors, our platinum sponsor, Brampton Brick, and our silver sponsors, Permacon, Aircraft, and the Alberta Masonry Council. So thank you for your support. So just a quick run through of the conference schedule. So obviously I'm talking right now. I'm Andrew Payne. I'm the Executive Director of Masonry Works Council of Ontario. For those of you who aren't familiar with what we do, we are the association representing the broader masonry industry here in the province of Ontario. So our members consist of manufacturers, suppliers, dealers, and contractors here in the province of Ontario. So our job is as the association for the industry is to work as the communications arm for the industry here to promote the use of masonry wall systems with our key stakeholders. So to start today, I've got a few driving questions that I want everyone here to kind of think of throughout the conference today. Let me just cue the poll here. So for those of you that are in the masonry industry with us today, certainly these questions apply to you, but also for those of us that are joining us from outside of the masonry industry, I'd be certainly interested to see the perspective that you think for these questions. So the first question should be on your screen now. So is masonry a green building material? So I'll just give a few more seconds. I think almost everyone there has answered. So overwhelmingly, yes. The crowd that we have here today believes that masonry is a green building material. There's 7% no, and a few of us aren't sure. The answer to that question, or the way that you perceive the answer to this question, may change throughout, or I'm hoping that as we go through what we have planned today, that the perspective that you have towards masonry being a green material, obviously I still think we all think that and know that masonry is green, but it can be greener, and that's what the driving kind of principle of today's conference is. So we'll just jump in. So the other kind of question that's driving today is, what are the long-term strategies for the industry to transition into the green economy? So we know that government and our large customers that we sell to mostly in the for the masonry industry are looking at this transition to the green economy. So what does that mean, and are we prepared? So here's one question that kind of will set the mindset for that. So is the masonry industry well positioned to participate in the transition to the green economy? So I'll give everyone a few more seconds to answer this question. All right, so as we can see here, it's a little bit not as definitive as the last one. So 54% of us think that the masonry industry is well positioned to participate in the green economy. 8% think no, and 38% think not sure. So this question kind of will set the table for a number of our speakers that are due up, particularly our next speakers. So these are, I just kind of keep those questions in mind throughout today, and see if your thoughts or opinions change or stay the same. So just to kind of set the table here. So on the verge of a shift. So Canada is on the verge of a significant shift and a full transition into the green economy. Governments of all levels and the private sector have adapted green standards and green investment strategies. Trillions of dollars globally is flowing into the green transition or the green economy to accelerate what is being dubbed as a green recovery. So this was certainly something that was mentioned in the federal budget earlier this year before the election, that coming out of COVID, the recovery will be focused on what we call a green recovery or have a green scope. So this kind of sets the table for the case for climate action. Why do we need this green transition, or why do we need the green economy? And a number of you, or all of us, probably know what happened in Lytton, British Columbia this summer. But I believe this summer was certainly one of the largest warning signs for us here, not only in Canada, but globally. So Lytton, British Columbia on June 30th, completely burnt to the ground. The whole town was virtually wiped off the map. Now, this happened after 3 consecutive days of setting the hottest temperature ever recorded in Canada. So they broke the heat record for 3 days and then burnt to the ground. So that adds a little bit of perspective. So that was June 30th, 2021. All right. On July 16th, we see in Germany this flooding that occurred. Again, virtually parts of the town fell right into that sinkhole, right? So we all saw the pictures of that. That was July 16th. As the water moved down the river into July 20th, the many European nations that such as Germany and Switzerland were kind of grappling with how their warning systems failed them, and it was because there was just so much rain. This was in China on July 20th, so not too far thereafter, or too many days thereafter. They received a year's worth of rain in 3 days. So these cars here obviously were pushed all together by the floodwaters. Unbelievable picture. Also on July 20th, Turkey set its hottest day ever, 49.1 degrees Celsius, which is borderline not safe for human living conditions. So that certainly was a big warning, I think, for all of us. So within the period of about 3 or 4 weeks, we saw a number of extreme, very concerning weather events. So this brings us to kind of the verge of the shift that we're on. So the green transition will be accelerated by the green recovery. So we're seeing this now from the private sector. And I believe the private sector also is starting to see what's going on and the destruction that's taking place throughout the planet. So we got how to avoid a climate disaster. We can see financial giants keep boosting their sustainable investments. World's largest money manager says sustainable investing surge to continue. Trudeau Biden adopt tougher emissions targets. We see that the budget pledges about $17 billion towards promote a green recovery in Canada. A number of Canadian companies pledge net zero emissions. We're looking at in the concrete sector, the carbon sucking concrete is capturing attention and funding. The glass industry has jumped on board net zero. The steel industry is aiming to achieve net zero by 2050. Cement laying the foundations for net zero carbon. And then we see the wood also a big piece of the puzzle by decarbonizing the economy by 2050. So again, we see that a number of private sector entities are moving towards this transition or participating in the transition. And I think particularly this might be of interest or concern for the masonry industry insofar that we see that a number of our competitors are getting on board with this. So we got to understand what the green transition is and what our plan and pathway forward is for that. And if we don't have a plan, to come up with one. So that is certainly the intention of the conference today. So again, the response. So the government and private sector have started to put in place mechanisms to mitigate and adapt to climate change. So we're seeing carbon pricing and carbon tax. Our first speaker will certainly get into that. International agreements. So we all know about the Paris Agreement, declarations of climate emergencies, and changes to codes and standards. So just a quick kind of crash course on the Paris Climate Agreement for those of you that aren't familiar at it. It's a legally binding agreement signed by 196 parties, including Canada. It's aimed at keeping global temperature rise at 2 degrees Celsius or lower than pre-industrial levels. Ideally, it's aiming to keep the temperature rise at below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Currently, we're at 1.2 degrees, and we're certainly starting to see the weather effects and the climate effects of that 1.2 degrees as shown earlier in the presentation. So Canada is currently not on pace to hit these targets. So this is a table from The Economist back in July, and it's showing, it's tracking all of the climate goals and emission goals from all of these 196 parties, including Canada. So you can see there that 1.2 warming by 2020, that's where we are. The dotted line is the 1.5 degree target. So the optimistic scenario that is there, including net zero goals. So if we hit all our net zero goals, the thought is that we keep warming to 2 degrees below. So if all of the Paris agreements, the COP26, if all of those pledges are met, so if we meet the current pledges, we currently will not hit our goal of staying at 2 degrees below. And those are policies that are not formally put in place, but agreed to. If we currently go with the policies that are currently in place, we will be pushing a 3 degree temperature rise by 2100, which is certainly very concerning. And the way that the kind of statisticians look at it now, 68% confidence is, so that's where we're going. So that was in The Economist in July. To check out where all these numbers are and kind of how each party is doing and the aggregated numbers, go to see the Climate Action Tracker. It's created by an NGO that is tracking all of the goals and commitments by each of these parties to kind of see where we're at and how on track we are to hit these targets. But we know if we go above 2 degrees Celsius, the damage to the climate at that point is irreversible. So that kind of trickles down into Canada this way. So over 500 Canadian municipalities have declared a climate emergency. So just some of the highlighted ones that we can see here. Obviously, most of the large cities across the country have done that, along with a number of Ontario municipalities. So these are all listed online, but you can see that the climate emergency certainly is something that gives municipalities policy levers to act on climate change and what's happening with the climate. So as we start to see these declarations come into force, municipalities will start acting on applying net zero concepts or green action plans, which certainly can affect the building materials that they're sourcing. So, oh, we're going backwards. Sorry, I'm pushing the wrong button. So this takes us into masonry and life cycle. So the University of Windsor is doing a study for masonry or with masonry works that is looking at the comparative life cycle of interior wall systems. So we see our masonry has 49% less environmental impact than steel stud and gypsum and 29% less environmental impact than wood stud and gypsum. Now, this is over a cradle to grave boundary. So we do know, and we will talk about the embodied carbon upfront that masonry produces. However, over a longer time horizon, masonry performs much better. So we can see that altogether, masonry materials have a less environmental, economic, and social impact. So you can see here, as I said, 49 and 21% lower than the other two materials. In terms of cost, so concrete block is 23 and 20% lesser than the other two systems, steel stud and wood stud. And on the social impacts, it is 18 and 15% less. So really what we're trying to push, and globally what we should really be looking at, is avoiding the 3-degree world. The climate crisis will be the defining issue globally over the next decade and beyond. The industry has an important role to play in addressing contributions to climate change. This will be facilitated through a transition to the green economy. So for thousands of years, masonry material has addressed building needs. The industry can continue to provide resilient, sustainable, and beautiful buildings. But we must rise to meet the challenge presented by a changing climate. So that's kind of setting the table here. And I think, this is certainly something that we should be on all of our radars. I know it's a busy time in the industry, and coming out of COVID, there's certainly a lot of challenges, but we've got to keep our eye on this ball. So with that, I can pass it over to our first speaker, David Arkell. David Arkell is the president of and co-founder of 360 Energy. With 25 years of experience in the energy industry, he's a Canadian and North American energy expert and trusted advisor with a deep understanding of energy and carbon markets, as well as corporate consumer energy and management behavior. His mission is to take charge against climate change by leading organizations across North America to better manage energy and carbon through comprehensive energy and carbon management programs. Clients of 360 Energy improve their bottom line and consistently achieve energy and carbon performance improvements year after year. 360 Energy's clientele ranges from manufacturing and cement producers to agriculture and greenhouse growers. You can learn more from David and his team on the 360 Energy and Carbon, a weekly podcast informing listeners on industry trends and business strategies. So with that, I will pass it over to you, David. I see you're, David, are you there? There we go. I believe that you're on mute.
Can you hear me now, Andrew?
Yes, we can.
Okay, and can you see the screen okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good morning, and thank you, Andrew, for that kind invitation. And I look forward to have this discussion with everyone in the next 45 minutes. As Andrew described, I can say I've been in the industry for over 25 years, and I started this company in 1995 because I realized and know that companies and organizations can actually control and reduce energy costs. And I have found in our industry sector that many people aren't aware of the tools to understand what needs to be done and how what they can do to undertake that process. So there's some process that needs to be done and information and knowledge base. And when that happens, customers can actually, reduce their energy costs. And now I'll talk about why that is of interest to you on the energy front. So when we talk about energy, 80% of the energy is actually carbon emissions. And what Andrew was discussing about the heating of the environment and climate change has a lot to do with GHG. And so certainly if you focus on energy and try to figure out how you can reduce your usage, if you can do fuel switching from fossil fuel based to electrification that's clean, that there's really a very good opportunity to help achieve the goals and targets that Andrew said. So today we'll be talking about looking at the energy lens and I'm going to use specifically the brick industry, just so everyone understands. So that's the reason we're going to be talking about sustainability and how energy plays a critical role in all industries to actually help them in reducing the climate change effect. So we have some examples. I can tell you we have worked in some large industries and sectors that are monsters. Excuse me, they're monsters, and that they, in many cases in the past, they felt there's nothing they can do to control energy or carbon costs. And I want to say to you, they're completely controllable. So this is just an example. We had worked with the Votorantim Cementos from 2008 to, quite frankly, 2017. And we worked with them exclusively throughout Canada on what they could do as an organization to reduce their energy costs and also reduce their carbon. And so this is an example of a program that they undertook, that they actually they identified what are the key matrix that they're going to measure and modify. And they then undertook this as a team. And so the cement industry, as Andrew suggested, is been very proactive in this area and will continue to do so. So I can say to you, the lesson here is that even though you might think there's nothing you can do, actually there's a lot you can do. You just have to have the proper process and understanding what to do. The next industry is the steel industry, and I think Andrew may have alluded to this. The steel industry is a targeted sector where there's a big carbon footprint, and so here's an organization. They're not a steel mill, but they're a steel integration. This is Samuel and Son. They're a $5 billion company. They're a Canadian-based company. They have sites throughout North America where they do some processing. And we have been working with them over the last 4 to 5 years. And each year they've been reducing their carbon footprint approximately 6% per year. And a lot of this is not capital based. So I want to stress to you, a lot of times people think, oh, I can't wrap my hands around this. It's too tough. I'm not going to do it. I want to convey to you, it's doable. It's not something that you can take a pill and then tomorrow everything's better. It's ongoing work. So I just want to give you, these are two examples of what we're doing and the work that's going on right now. Andrew, can you hear all this dinging going on in my background here? Is that, I hope you're not hearing all this. Okay, good. Okay, good enough. All right, so let's talk about the curve. And this is a representation of the waves that we've had. Certainly the last 2 years has been quite challenging with the pandemic. And so, everyone's been focusing on that, but certainly the larger wave and this wave that will be much bigger that Andrew had talked about is climate change. And it's interesting, if you look at this graph, this depicts, if you look at the vertical axis, number of deaths that occur. And you can see when with COVID, with no action, how, and we have examples throughout North America, maybe even south of the border, where they didn't really focus on COVID, and you can see the number of deaths. And then if someone took action and there's lockdown, that actually the deaths were substantially reduced. I think Andrew had mentioned that certainly this climate change is going to have a huge impact. And actually, even in BC, this is northwestern BC, just because of climate change this summer, 587 people passed away because of the heat that was deemed by the medical group. So my point is that there's a lot of reasons why we got to get on this. But the most important thing I want to convey to you is the big tsunami is climate change. And so this is why organizations need to be aware of that. and understand what they could do. Now, let's talk about effectively. Let's look at the money. Let's talk about what money is out there and how the impact is going on. So this actual slide is from the Canadian government, and it's by the CPA that were involved in delivering this. The summary is, if you look at all the risks in the global economy, and you can see there's various ones from conflict to debt crisis, that actually climate change is deemed, and this is just so everyone understands, the World Economic Forum is made up economists from around the world. So they have identified as this as being the biggest challenge and the risk the world has to face. And so it will need a monumental effort, and quite frankly, everyone to participate in this as well. Now, I don't know if there's many people on the online here, but I think a lot of people, they're hearing about this, but they're saying, you know what, I'm too busy making money, and so no, don't bother me. But the summary is, if you don't put the wheels on this challenge, I'm not sure your business will be viable in the years going forward. So it's really important that people in every industry, and I'm focusing on the brick industry, that you start seriously looking at this and take action, because there is concerns that it could impact your business negatively. It also could be that if you look at it closely, there might be an opportunity that you might be able to take advantage of because of this as well. So, there's a lens that you need to look at. Now let's look at the money side. Let's look at the risk, because I think that always catches owners' attention and operators and executive. The amount of money that is going to be spent because of climate change is phenomenal. And we'd all be silly to think that this is not going to impact our wallets, because it will. You just have to look at your insurance rates. I don't know if people have looked at even their personal insurance rates, how they continue to increase year after year. So this is a listing of a lot of different expenditures that has been done so far and also expected going forward. So certainly, if you follow the money, there's a reason why people are on this right now, and we all should be on this because of that. This is a risk map provided by Moody's, and it identifies what we class as 16 sectors that are at risk. And this is because their fear is there's debt that these industries have, and that if they aren't able to stay in business because of climate change, that they're at risk of not paying back that debt. And yes, many of these industries, you would be very clear: oil and gas, automotive, chemical. But if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, you can see that building materials is on that list. And I dare say that's the people online would be well aware of that. So your industry is at risk. And so what does that mean? That means if you're looking to expand or change or modify, you're going to be possibly looking for financing, and it might be debt financing. If you don't have a map or a thought process or a plan demonstrating that you're taking on this risk, a couple things might happen. One, you may get a reduced number of people that are interested in investing in you. And the second thing is the people that are investing in you you'd be deemed as a higher risk. So your interest rate of borrowing is going to be much higher. So that itself for owners and investors is something that they're looking at very closely. And so I'm saying, again, you just follow the money, and people are starting to wake up and go, okay, what should we do? What should we be in? What should we be out of? As what Andrew described, it looks like you're in a very favorable position as far as on the impact on carbon and climate change. But how many people know about that? And by the way, what else could you do personally or in your organizations or industry to make improvements on that as well? Okay, now this should hit people very close. My understanding is that the gas industry is sorry. The gas industry is, or natural gas is a big part of your operating cost. So let me explain this slide. We're involved with customers. So on the far left slide, if you look at the blue line, that shows this is a natural gas commodity cost. So starting in September 20, like at the 2020 in September, the natural gas commodity cost, this is out of NYMEX, was $2.50. And now we're looking at September 30th, you're looking at the price of natural gas being $5. Now, I want to give you a heads up. A lot of this incremental cost increase is a variety of factors, but a big part of this is climate change. And so what's happened is natural gas industry has now become more of a worldwide marketplace, and natural gas is now being exported to Europe and Asia because they're short natural gas, and that's actually forced our North American pricing up. I want to give you a heads up. I actually think this is a cycle that we're going to live with for a long time. The days of having low natural gas costs, I think, have gone away. And so I'm expecting boards, senior management will all of a sudden wake up when they found out their budget is blown away, because I don't think many people expected this going forward. So be aware that your input costs, specifically natural gas and electrical costs, will increase significantly if you haven't taken action. The other piece I want to bring to you on the right side, as Andrew mentioned, so I'll explain to you, when you're paying for natural gas, there's a commodity cost, there's a transportation cost, and there's a distribution cost. So, and then there's another cost that's been factored because there's now carbon pricing that's put on to the natural gas pricing. So if you look at 2021, on top of all those other costs, you're paying another $2.04. By 2030, that carbon cost will go up to $8.67. That will be added on top of the commodity, the transportation, and distribution. It's significant, and it will have a huge impact, I suspect, to your operations in your even the profitability of your organizations if action isn't taken or wasn't taken or what isn't being considered. So certainly you just have to follow the money and you'll start seeing why you should be concerned. Now, there is a requirement or a request around the globe to reduce the carbon emissions by 57% by 2030. And as Andrew suggested, the intent of that is to try to limit our global temperature increase by 1.5%. Now, whether that's doable or not, that's a question. But the question I have for people online is, what is the clay brick sector doing to reduce their carbon per ton of brick? Because ultimately, I think you're going to get your customers start asking what you've done and what steps you're taking. And certainly you'll have to have answers associated with that of what you're doing and how you're helping out in this area of focus. So now I want to talk to you sort of a business model that I know that works because of the work that we've done since 1995 with challenging organizations who don't think that there's anything that they can do on energy/carbon. So I want to convey to you, I'm going to go through this, I'm going to explain to you this model, but I'm going to say to you, when done and done properly, and I'll explain what that means, you can achieve a 5 to 10% reduction on your GHGs annually. But there's some different thinking and a thought process that have to be put in place. And by the way, this effort it's economically sensible. It actually, yes, there's some time and effort that you have to invest, but ultimately, not only does it position your organization to reduce or control future energy costs or carbon costs, but you'll actually find that it might even help increase your product production, the quality of your product, or even enhance the working environment within your organization. So there's a lot of benefits, and I think people always talk about how this climate change is a real money grab, and certainly there's an investment. Just like any organization, you anytime you want to get into a new market, you have to invest. But I'm going to say to you, when it's done and done properly, it actually can make a lot of good business sense for you to do. So just bear with me, and I'm going to go through that right now. I have found in our industry that most people think it's strictly a transaction. You just buy something and it's done. I'm going to suggest to you, there is some transactions that need to be done or considered, but you should really think hard and long and plan what you should do, who you should transact with, when should you transact, should you even transact. And so most organizations, legacy wise, they have not spent a lot of time or invested a lot of effort in managing energy and carbon. And that's a big challenge for them because they've never done it before. So they don't know what it means and they don't know who to turn to. So I'm going to now explain the process to you as well. This is kind of the blueprint that I would encourage organizations like yourself to consider if you're going to go down this pathway. And to be clear, we help organizations do this, but I'm going to convey this to you to show you what we have found to be very, very helpful to advance organizations to achieve those target numbers that I talked about before. So first of all, where to start? And that's the biggest challenge. Most customers don't know where to start, who to speak to, how to do it. That is the biggest problem. And so I want to say to you, the biggest area of focus for you at the very beginning is collecting data. And that I'm going to say specifically energy data related to your operation. And you need to understand, what you're using for water, what you're using for natural gas, what you're using for electricity, when is that used, why is it used? And then having that information, you can actually develop a story on what the organization really looks like as it relates to energy and what you can do to reduce your carbon. This actually is a storyboard. This is actually from the UK, showing the product life cycle of the brick industry. And you can see, starting from the bottom, the raw materials and production, the amount of carbon. This is the amount of carbon per cubic meter of brick, and they break it out in the whole life cycle cost. Now, what I want to bring to your attention, remember I said 80% of the carbon that is emitted comes from energy. If you look at the bottom, which is 76% raw material and production, that would be mainly energy related that the carbon comes from. If you look at the distribution, that would be mainly trucks or forklifts or doing the distribution. So you can tell that 80% of the brick industry in the UK is based on, like, the carbon and the carbon emissions is based on the energy used. Now the question I have, and I don't, it's to people in Ontario, what does your global footprint look like? What can you identify? So certainly getting the data, and I understand that there's few players, but in this industry, but each player should actually understand what this looks like. And you use this information to focus on what you do, when you do it, and how you do it going forward. So that's the big start. And certainly the UK has been working on this for some time, and you can see that they have been active in this area. What I want to say to you is that a lot of organizations we're finding understand the issue, but they fear, they don't understand what to do, and it really requires leadership. And that means people have to step up and be able to take this on. And it's not one person, it's many people in the organization. Because certainly sustainability is an issue that has to be dealt with in every industry, but certainly in your industry as well. And I'm going to say to you, there's a really good opportunity not only to help reduce your carbon footprint as an industry, but you might even find there's going to be great opportunities for you in actually finding new markets that you didn't consider going forward. So what are the important pieces? So the first piece is data. The second piece is people. And it has to be looked at the executive suite to the site level. And I can tell you from our personal experience, if I can't work or discuss this to find out the interest and the determination and the resolve from senior management, and it's thrusted upon us to do this work at a site level, we won't even do the work because senior management isn't being serious about this. But but here's the good news: they're now serious. They now realize that because of the money, because of the investors, that they have to start demonstrating that they're doing things. So good news is they're more interested in this topic than they've ever been. And so what you really have to do is inform the senior management. So we've just been doing some interviews with 27 executives in the sector, and they're all saying they understand it's an issue, but they don't know, they haven't moved the dial because they really don't know what to do and how to do it. And so I think what we keep on hearing is they want to be educated. They want to be informed. They want to understand what they can do in their position to take this on. And so certainly explaining and informing them is really important, but also putting best practices in place as noted here below. Again, this was written, developed by CPA, talking about what are the critical components that the executives have to take. And so that's something that you can't just hand over this piece of paper and they take it on. You actually have to develop a climate or an environment within the organization to ensure that all people are on the same page and they execute. And that takes a little effort to do that. But certainly, I think there's certainly the interest with organizations to take that on. So I've stressed this leadership is not only at the board level, CEO, the executive suite, but it also needs to be at a general manager and plant floor. So we've done this enough now that when we've done this work and we've found that we've got something moving at a site level, but and I've got probably the president interested, but if the general managers aren't motivated, if they're not tasked with this, like it all has to be aligned. All those parties have to be aligned to move the dial, and that's a very, very important point to actually make this happen. So now I'm going to move to dealing with the executive suite. Now we want to work with the site level, and we want to work with a multidisciplinary group. It's really essential that we have financial people involved, we have operations people, we have maintenance people involved, we have engineering, because we have to inform them and make sure they understand what options are, where their current status is, and then working with them, we come up with a game plan of how it can be executed. So developing a multidisciplinary team with knowledge, a starting point, where they are, and then where they want to go, and then report that back to the senior level is absolutely essential. So in summary, we're talking about we've got to have data, we have to have people, we have to have the right people. And then the third item is technology. And most people start with technology at the beginning, but actually it's technology's the last thing we look at. We map the process with the teams, and then we convey and figure out where the energy used in each one of these pieces. And then we start brainstorming, and the players within the team start identifying areas of reduction. So it could be from energy efficiency, it could be from fuel switching, it could be purchasing renewable gas, it could be putting renewable energy on electricity, solar panels, whatever. It could be buying forward contracts. The bottom line is to understand where you're going, you have to know where you've been, and then you have to inform the people on the site. So I encourage you as organizations to drive this knowledge base within the organization. I mean, we're an outside party that works with customers on a continuous basis, but if you rely on a third party to take this on, and then the third party goes away, it's not sustainable. So you want to build this knowledge within the organization all the time so it actually makes it happen. And so if you look at the color codes of this actually aligns with sort of where the effort is with the UK. When we talked about 76% being production, Well, there you can see that that's the yellow brick. That's the drying, the firing, the hacking, the brick packaging. So that's where 76% of the energy is being used in the UK base. So you really need to understand the mapping and then come up with a game plan. Now, that game plan, unlike energy, when we work with customers, we typically are looking at a short window. We're looking at a year to plan out a strategy. Sometimes if we're fortunate enough, we'll go to a 3-year strategy, but it's most customers are looking for short-term payback. With climate change and with the work that has to be done at an executive level, you need to look much further out. You need to look at least 5 years. And so that fits into typically the executive's vision. They normally are looking much further out, but you have to have that plan in place, and that plan has to fit with the strategic direction of the organization. And so it's essential when you're doing the strategic plan that you're looking at 2 phases. You're looking at adaptation and mitigation, because certainly, as Andrew had addressed, there's already things happening because of climate changes. And it's amazing when you start talking to the executive and asking them questions, they really have to reflect, and they start realizing, man, this actually is impacting our business. And wait a minute, maybe there is an opportunity here. But I want to make sure that you've got to look at this 2 phases. You got to look how you're going to adopt, because it's going to happen. It's to what degree. But then you want to look at how you're going to mitigate it and how you're going to mitigate it going forward. So I want to ensure people this is not something that happens quickly. It's organic. It takes time, but you'll see a lot of benefits associated with it. It's a different type of thinking, but quite frankly, I think it's the type of thinking that will be required going forward. And mitigation and adaptation will be essential not only for your business, how you operate, but if you even think about your customers and where there's opportunities as well. Now let's talk about reporting, because I think that's an area that's a missing element in financial statements. So now you're seeing more and more requirements or requests for organizations to put into their financial statements the impact of climate change. And so this particular slide is showing from the Carbon Tracker Initiative that 70% of the companies that have been reporting financials have not indicated of any of these things of how climate change may be a risk to them. I'm going to say to you, I think that's going to end very soon, certainly in Canada, and that organizations are going to have to, this will be an important piece. It's already a requirement in the UK that you have to disclose how climate change is going to impact your financial statements. So I'm saying this whole idea of reporting, understanding what you're doing, how you're doing it, I think it's going to be driven. So I'm encouraging our clients to get on this now before it's thrusted upon them and they have no idea what to do and how to do it. So that will be very important for them as well. And as I've said to you, that I'm not sure people are familiar with, it's the Task Force of Climate Financial Disclosure that I was referring to earlier. The UK and Europeans are now requested to put that into their financial statements, and now there's discussions of Canada following that, as well as other areas in South America and other parts of the world. So it's coming, and so you'll want to be aware of what that means and what that means to you as an organization, what that means to your investors, because investors will be looking at this as well. So there's an opportunity, and I want to say to you, in the work that we've done with the 2 cases that I was explaining, and we have others, that you have to celebrate the small things. There won't be the large opportunities of reducing your carbon, for example, using hydrogen versus natural gas. That's maybe out 5 or 10 years. Like that's going to take time. So you've got to start chipping away at the little things, and you need to really celebrate the successes internally. But I'm also encouraging organizations to let their clients know of the work they're doing. Be transparent. Once you feel comfortable with what you're doing and how you do it, you really will want to convey to within your organization what they've done, the success they've had, and promote it, because it will serve you well. You may find that you'll maintain employees or keep employees longer, which is always a big challenge these days, trying to keep talented employees, but also will be helpful for you in your clients, because I'm not sure people online how many of their clients are now asking, what are you doing? And so you want to keep this information available so you can share with them what you've done, how you've implemented. But I do, Andrew mentioned or talked about net zero emissions. A lot of clients not sure even know what that means, what that's all about. We're supportive of that, but we're suggesting to you, don't race out and talk about a net zero emission unless you actually understand what it means and that it's actually achievable. It doesn't take long for an expert to go into an organization who talks about net zero. I'm probably going to ask 5 questions. I could find out pretty quickly if it's just greenwashing, and that's not going to be of any value to you or anyone else. So make sure that when you're setting your targets, it's real. It may be net zero, it may not be net zero, but at least looking and setting a target would be really important going forward. So ultimately, we've got to do this. I mean, Andrew mentioned it, the planet. That's certainly something. Canadians, we're very dependent on our natural resources industry, and if our natural resource industry isn't on board or on this, then we could lose market share or our economic standing. So certainly, I think Canada has a real interest or requirement to move on this. For the province, I would say for your company, if your company is not on this, then that's certainly going to be and specifically the industry. And the last thing I want to say to you is, when we've done this work with organizations, you'll be amazed on the not only the passion that comes from players that are actually participate in this, and the success and the stimulation, and they feel pleased with what they've done. But it also goes back home where people see what they have done, and everyone likes to be with in an organization that does good things for the planet and serves the company or the family really well. So it's very, very important to do that. The question is, what actions will you take? And I know in this short time I've gone through some things probably pretty rapidly for yourself, but I'm going to suggest that you start thinking about that and start talking to other people in your organization. I without being over the top, I do fear industries that don't take this on, that don't take this seriously. I do think your industry will be challenged, and I'm not sure how viable it will be because of the requirements going forward. I do believe there could even be regulated requirements. I'm not sure and I hate per se regulations, because I like it when customers can choose, but I think I'm encouraging anyone listening right now to start looking at this and figuring out what they can do and what your company can do and how you can go forward. I want to give everyone a heads up. We do a podcast every week. We talk to a variety of experts from around the globe, and we're really trying to look at what options or solutions or things need to be factored in the energy and carbon industry. It's really set up for people in the industry to learn about what can be done, how it can be done, who they could talk to, things of that nature. So if you're interested in podcasts and listen to those, you might want to check this out and see if there's any particular topics that might be of interest to yourselves. It's quite interesting. We just started this up, and now we're having a following internationally from Europe because of the topics that are being covered. So I think if there's interest in continual learning, feel free to check that out. And then, so the summary is the time is right. And so if what you heard, if you need help, or if we can be of any assistance to you, we'd be pleased to sit down and talk to see if we can be of any assistance at all. But the model that I conveyed to you, we know it works. We know that there's measurable reductions that can be achieved by organizations undertaking it. Certainly, there's a process that's in place, but it's a proven process. So please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions after this. And Andrew, I think I'm a little early, like 7 minutes,
That's
but
all right.
happy to take any questions based on what I covered.
Yeah, certainly. So we can open it up to questions. So feel free to pop them into the Q&A, the chat, or raise your hand if you feel the need to talk, or if you want to talk. Sorry. I can certainly kick it off with questions. I think there's a few things that stuck out. And first of all, thank you for the presentation. I think certainly that provides a very important insight to the industry members that are on here today, and kind of the the broader audience too that's looking from the outside. It's definitely an issue that we all need to work on addressing. The question I have that stuck out to me is around the climate financial disclosures. So when you talk about that, is that something currently now that when companies are forecasting, they're not factoring in risk of things like carbon tax and carbon pricing? Is that right?
It's more, well, that would be part of it, Andrew, for sure. But it's really about the impact of climate change to your business. So, what impact, let's say to the brick industry, what impact would it have because of climate change? How will that impact your clients in using your product? Will flooding and things that are hurricanes or tornadoes or whatever, will that enhance? Is that a value proposition that your product has? How will that impact your supply chain in manufacturing this product? So it's really looking at what risks that you might see coming because of dramatic climate change. And to be truthful, most organizations haven't thought about that. I know that because these exercise we've taken with interviewing these 27 executives around North America. When we ask that question, they all stumble, and then all of a sudden go, "Oh, well, hold on. There was a tornado that we're having more frequent tornadoes here in the south. I didn't really think about that." Like it's just they just do their day to day. So they'll need to factor that because for investors or any financial institutions that will be loaning money or want to provide money, they'll want to know as a company or as an industry that you factor that so their money will be safe and a safe harbor. Really important.
Right. Yeah, and certainly I think it's something that we need to have on the radar. So we've got a question here from Jeff. How typical is it for industries to have upwards of 70% of their GHG impact entirely upfront? Is Masonry somewhat unique in that respect, or have other industries had success in having to address large front-loaded GHG impacts?
Depends on the sector, but you'll want to know our typical rule of thumb is 80% of GHG comes from energy. So there's scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. What you saw primarily, that 76% was, I would think, primarily scope 1 in the brick industry because of the natural gas. But a lot of industry, it's upfront. It's just no one's actually looked at energy in that way, in that impact. Certainly, there's exceptions, but energy plays a predominant role, and is an area that can be focused on to answer that question from our experience.
Perfect. So I'll follow up with another question. Are you aware? I mean, obviously, it's a lot easier for some of these larger multinational corporations to adapt and address the challenges of climate change, particularly when it comes to fuel switching or mitigating GHGs. A lot of I believe the energy that we produce comes from SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. for them, and I know you addressed it a little bit in the presentation, but is there kind of more of a roadmap or some assistance available from either the federal or provincial governments to help SMEs along that may not have the wherewithal or the kind of large resources of some of the bigger competitors out there?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I understand that question because I showed you two mammoths that we work with. So to be specific, there is some assistance from the federal government. I expect there's going to be more going forward. I think utilities will start being more active in that area. But we actually work with most of our customers are SMEs. And so when I, just for everyone's benefit, if anyone spends $500,000 a year or more annually on utilities, there's a really good case to get on this and to focus. Like the return on investment for you as an organization can be quite helpful. So yes, there is assistance from the federal government. I think there's going to be more. I know we're in conversations with them with some of the work we're doing because this is a hot topic and a required topic. So I think you're going to see more and more area of focus. We actually think the SMEs is a great market and actually could lead the large folks. So here's our experience: is you've got a lot of bureaucracy with large organizations, and yeah, they might have more money to throw around, but they have a lot of bureaucracy. And so you got to cut through that. That's can be daunting and challenging. The SMEs, we actually think, can lead this sector, lead Canada. We've put a paper together for the federal government saying that we think the SMEs could lead the sector with a proper knowledge base. I think they're working on that. So stay tuned. Certainly, and if we hear more about this, I'm happy to share that or bring that to your attention. You can send it to your members. But I would not, if you're an SME, this is what I've just described to you in that model. That's completely doable by yourselves and can be done. So I'd encourage you to not sit back. And I think actually you'll be probably faster in success in that.
Awesome. So we got another question here from Mason. So over the years, we have found it very difficult to convince limestone, gabbro, and dolomitic quarries to allocate a small portion of their quarry to cut block harvesting for our fabrication industry. For my calculations, which I can share at a later time, for every 1 square foot of vertical masonry, we can switch from the cementitious industry to natural stone. We can reduce the carbon emissions into the air by 0.9 pounds. Is there assistance to help us harvest more natural stone blocks from Canadian quarries?
So I would say what I'm hearing, if you could demonstrate the reduction in GHGs, and there's an economic behind it, there's economics for you to sell the product, I think you'd get lots of interest in this. Now it's trying to find out who you speak to, but it sounds to me even a marketing opportunity to take advantage of that as well. So I'd encourage the person, whoever suggests that, to go a little further with that, because I think you're going to find more and more clients are going to start asking for this information. So I'd be open to, if that person wants to share that, I'm happy to take a look and see if there's anything that we might suggest for them to consider as well.
Yeah, I can certainly pass along their contact if you just want to connect. So at this point, I've got another question. I know we talk a lot about the cost and where carbon pricing is going or where it has gone. Is there any sort of cost benefit analysis? I mean, the cost of doing, I know you kind of touched on it on that slide, but the cost of doing nothing for these industries that have upwards of 80% upfront GHG or energy in their manufacturing process. I mean, what does that look like on kind of a larger scale?
Yeah, we did that calculation some time back. I think just on the carbon tax, Let me just just if you could bear with me, Andrew, I think I can answer that specifically for you based on the brick, because it was substantial money, like massive money that they would have to be paying. And the interesting part is that most people in the sector are not aware of this cost and the incremental cost. And I don't think it's been factored in the financial, if you talk about risk associated with profitability, I don't think that's been factored even in their accounting people. I don't think they're well aware of that. So let me see if I can find this for you. If I can't find it, I can certainly get back to you. Yeah, I can't find it. I'm going to give you I think we used assumptions on the for a brick manufacturer, and I think we included there like depending on 1,000 GJs a day. So just do the quick math. It's 1,000 GJs. You're now, before you weren't charged anything on carbon, you're now going to be charged $8 per GJ just for carbon. That's $8,000 a day. Just so you know how that in the gas industry, and then you multiply that by 365 days. That's how the gas industry works. So you're paying a crap load of money going forward because of carbon tax.
Mm. Well, and it's a 400% increase by 2030. Sorry. Right.
Yeah. Yes. And here's the other thing too, and I think it probably got lost. I think actually we're going into an energy super cycle. That depending on who listens to that means different things. To a producer or a generator, that means they make money. To the client or customers, that means you're going to pay more money. And so I think I can tell you from experience, because I've been in this for a while. So for at least 5 years, the energy markets have been really soft, and no one's even factored or looked at them. But I think in the next 10 years, the elevation of pricing is going to get boardrooms' attention because no one's looked at this in the past. And so what does that mean? They're going to have to start looking at what they're going to do to help mitigate those incremental costs. And so it might be from efficiency, but it might be looking at alternative fuels, whatever it might be. They'll have to look at things that they've never looked at for a long time or forever in the past. And I think this is why it's a great time. I don't know if you have any executives online here now, but I think it's going to get their attention. Because it's going to have a huge impact on their profitability. I don't know. Maybe the brick industry is fortunate. Maybe they can just pass on those costs and the customer pays it. Maybe that's the case. But you have competitive forces in the marketplace that you have to compete with. So I don't know how that impacts you in comparison to your other sectors. But like everything's coming together at the same time, and it's daunting and challenging. There's less resources. People don't have time. But I'm take it for what it's worth. I actually think there's going to be some real value to spend some time and effort on this climate change and the energy file, because it's not a problem just for the year. I think it's going to be a problem for the next 10 years and beyond. So best to get at it now.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, we certainly appreciate your insights today. I think if there's not any more questions now, we can wrap up, and definitely a lot of thought-provoking concepts that were put here. So we will provide David's contact to everyone that was on the presentation today. Certainly encourage you to reach out to him to get more insight and potentially have him help you on this roadmap as we move into the green economy. These are certainly important questions, and we can see that David's team has started to figure it out and has a lot of the answers that we're sitting around scratching our heads to. So thank you for your time, David, and I'll certainly be able to put some of our members in touch with you.
Andrew, thank you for the time, and thank you for participants for your time. If there's any questions at all, and you're leery to reaching out, feel free to reach out to Andrew. Andrew can send the questions. I'm happy. The more knowledgeable we get people, the better the decisions they make. That's our philosophy. So please feel free to reach out at any time. And thank you, Andrew, again.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, have a great day.
Yeah, take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, so we got about 5 minutes until our next speakers do up. So I'll give everyone 5 minutes here to get up, stretch their legs, take a washroom break if you need that, and fill up your coffee, and then we'll be right into the next speaker. So we'll be good to go at 11 o'clock. And so give you a 5 minute break there. All right, well, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully, you were able to get a quick break there and stretch your legs. Our next speaker, I'm super excited, and we're very lucky to have her on today. And Gabby, I've enabled screen sharing. I'll just do a quick intro for you there. So, Gabriella has advocated for local government action on advancing sustainable communities for more than 25 years through her work at the Toronto Environmental Alliance, ICLEI, Cities for Climate Protection campaign, and currently is the executive director at Clean Air Partnership. Her focus has been to encourage, support, and monitor implementation of clean air and climate change actions, and to build partnerships that enable collaboration among communities at all levels of government. Gabriella has a bachelor degree of science in environmental geography from Concordia University and a master's degree in environment and business from the University of Waterloo. Clean Air Partnership is a charitable environmental organization that works with municipalities and their partners to enable communities to improve air quality, advance active transportation, and take bold climate action. They convene networks, lead research and knowledge transfer, and catalyze transformative action. So with that, Gabby, we're very happy to have you here today, and I will pass it over to you. And certainly we'll have questions and stuff throughout the presentation, or would you prefer that there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Really encourage questions during the presentation. Always good to get a little bit more interaction happening in this day and age.
Oh,
thanks,
absolutely.
Andrew. And thanks everyone for allowing me the time to share a little bit about the story about how buildings can become the climate champions that we need them to be. Really glad to be able to engage in this conversation with you. I've been working on working with municipalities and other levels of government. Really the main goal that we've been trying to do on this front is breaking down the silos that exist within government. So across municipal governments, getting planning to work with public health, getting public health working with transportation, and then also in particular, trying to get alignment across the different levels of government as well. Because one of the things I have learned of working in the environmental field over the last 20 odd years is that we don't have any more time to waste, and we all got to work together to start pulling rowing in the same direction. And it really is an all hands on deck initiative that we need to advance towards. So one of the key important things that's really important that we all need to take into consideration, most importantly, is where are our emissions coming from? How are we using energy, and how is the use of our energy related to the greenhouse gas emissions that they produce? So no doubt, transportation is a big component of our energy use and our greenhouse gas emissions. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that. But one of the key important things about this is how our buildings use energy and how much GHG emissions come from our building use. As you can see in the province of Ontario, it's about 21% of GHG emissions can come from buildings. In particular, in municipalities, in our communities, the percentage of emissions that come from our buildings can usually go up to about 50%, largely because of the fact when you're looking at the commercial sector and you're looking at residential sector, those two sectors in our communities form a big component of the GHG emissions that get released within our communities. So the municipalities have put a lot of focus on trying to address how is energy used within our buildings and what role can we play in helping to identify opportunities to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and enable the building sector and our buildings to be the climate champions we need them to be. One of the mechanisms that municipalities have used to try and address this is the use of green development standards. And they can either be voluntary or mandatory standards. I did want to kind of highlight, it's not only about the GHG emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions that green development standards look at. The green development standards really look at how a development fits within the overall community. So while energy and GHG emissions is a big component of green development standards that municipalities are working to advance, it's not the only component. Where the building is located, how easily accessible it is to public transportation opportunities, how accessible it is to active transportation. Is it part of a mixed use community where there is the ability to live, work, and play in a very close proximity to each other that would allow active transportation to be a viable transportation option for folk is also considered. And then there's other things that green standards look at, which is close to access to green space, how much urban trees are actually going to be planted in the area, how is the soil depth to enable those trees to grow and increase in size. So a number of different kind of areas. How much precipitation is dealt with on site versus how much goes into the stormwater system. Those are other types of environmental metrics and sustainability metrics that these green development standards cover. But for today, we're going to focus in on energy and GHG's emissions, those kind of metrics with regards to the building stock. So one of the key things, we know that from the example of how we build our communities enables us how we figure out how we kind of interact with our communities over the time. The COVID response is really focused in on community design and the role that it plays in community livability and access to green space and equity. Climate emergencies are being declared in municipalities and governments all around the world, and we have over 60 Ontario municipalities that have passed climate emergencies. Our population is going to be growing pretty significantly over this time period. So we have to house more people and provide more jobs, but also reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. In addition, we also have to reduce our energy infrastructure costs. We can no longer be flippant in terms of our energy decisions. We really need to explore what are the different options and how do we get our energy options to really address the infrastructure deficits that many of our planning decisions have actually led us to. In addition, I think one of the key things to look at is it's really how do we change an energy system, which is what we need to do to rise to the challenge associated with greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. So I did want to kind of speak to it. This is a legislative and policy context that municipalities use for green development standards. It's not something kind of like, but it is one of the areas I just wanted to highlight just to kind of identify the authorities that municipalities have for this. But ultimately, what municipalities are trying for their green development standards to achieve is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce infrastructure costs, really protect the natural environment, and really use it to build complete communities. The really connection with regards to public health, and in addition, the local economy and how we can actually transfer our expenditures to energy costs, which mostly leave our communities, and invest instead in efficiency, and especially within regards to the existing building stock, the economic development and job creation opportunity that presents. So I'll give you an example. The Toronto and Whitby have their green standard. It's a tiered mandatory approach. So tier 1 is mandatory, but it outlines where tier 4 is, where the destination the municipality is trying to aim for. And then over time, the tiers increase as the sector builds capacity to meet each of the different tier levels. There's another type of green development standard that municipalities have in place that's related to, we call that the menu approach. So while no specific metrics are mandatory, the development has to achieve a minimum threshold score to proceed through the development application process. And each of the sustainability metrics are allocated a point score. So that it's up to the developer to determine how actually they want to achieve their sustainability target that they need to achieve. So I just wanted to highlight where these green development standards are in place across Ontario, and a number of other municipalities are really trying to advance the green development standards within their communities. What is the purpose of all of these? It's really to build, we know that we need to go towards net zero. Everything that we build from an new building stock that is just built to Ontario Building Code standards will have to be retrofitted within 10 to 15 years. And we know that retrofitting costs more and achieves less than if you build with net zero carbon in mind from the beginning of the construction process and planning and design process. So one of the key things I wanted to highlight is that one of the projects that took place just recently from CMHC was to work with a series of, I think there were 6 different developers, all going towards net zero ready, and all in the low-rise sector, to try and explore what's the market analysis, what's the changes in the supply chain that needs to take place, what's the trades need to be trained for in order to build the net zero ready buildings of our future. So these are the 5 buildings, 5 communities that had net zero developments that occurred within them. generally what was found, and this was the interesting, what was generally found in terms of the low-rise sector is that to build from Ontario Building Code, to build to net zero ready is approximately $20,000 in initial upfront capital costs at this point in time. The goal is that we want to kind of try and move the overall market towards that, towards being competitive in terms of moving towards that being the regular standard for everything. So one of the things we're trying to do is do the training and the capacity building within the construction community to help drive us to where we need to be as soon as possible. Another example of a project that's taking place is in Clarington, and it's really one of the things that's questioned is like, we don't do the performance monitoring of occupied buildings to know, are they actually achieving the outcomes in terms of energy performance that we're seeking from them? And that's something that we really need to do a better job of, because we actually don't do enough performance monitoring. We rely a lot on modeling to kind of identify whether we've achieved the targets or not. And we need to do a lot more performance monitoring of occupied buildings and tracking that. Some of the projects they're really kind of highlighting is bringing solar cities, so bringing solar panels onto our buildings and sharing on the technological kind of issues, laws, bylaws that we need to advance, streamlining connection aspects. We don't have necessarily a complete comprehensive policy framework in Ontario that we need to have. There's nothing stopping anyone from putting solar panels on their own roof, but it's pretty much left up to them to figure it out on their own. In addition, we really need to kind of advance the market towards virtual net metering, which is really moving to really accelerate the adoption of solar in so many other jurisdictions. And what that would enable is a third party to lease space on people's buildings, install the solar panels where they take the responsibility for all the upfront capital, and then the lease, and then pay for a space on buildings that shares the revenue coming in from those PV panels with the building occupant. But it just means that it addresses the upfront capital cost barrier that creates a lot of resistance in implementing these projects. In addition, the city of Halifax has loaned money and attached it to the property as part of their Solar City project. So what they did is they loaned money to the residents, where the residents, and then kind of a turnkey project where the program installed solar panels on residents' buildings, rooftops, and then the buildings pay back the upfront capital as a surcharge on their property tax bill over time. Again, trying to address the upfront capital issue, upfront capital barrier that reduces the amount of renewable energy that gets installed. Really wanted to highlight some of the projects taking place, looking at solar potential, looking at where that can be. And then highlight some of the kind of district energy systems. It's one thing, like if you think about it from a developer perspective and work that they're doing to try and advance this, for them to kind of set up their energy planning in the traditional manner as it's used, which means you call up your electrical utility and the wires come in. And then you call up your natural gas utility and the pipelines come in. And then if you're a developer and you're trying to do the status quo energy planning, your work is done there. But if you're a developer who wants to advance a lower carbon opportunity, then one of the challenges is you're pretty much left on your own to figure it out, which is not a very viable, conducive way to advancing these types of development. So we need to do better with regards to municipalities, streamlining the lower carbon opportunities, not just at the building level, but also at the community level, such as the City of Markham District Energy Project. An example of this is the Mattamy and Enwave partnership, which is instead of relying on natural gas to heat the buildings in a new development, they're going to be relying on geothermal energy and creating a geothermal district energy loop that will then provide no carbon actually heating load to those new developments. Here's an example in the city of Vancouver that's using sewage waste heat to heat a development that's next door. So that's part of the Falls Creek City, using waste heat and then providing thermal and replacing fossil fuels. This is also being done in Saanich, BC. We have a huge waste recovery opportunities here in Canada, and we still don't know exactly all of the waste heat opportunities, but we're going to have to be a lot more innovative in terms of identifying how we meet energy needs of people in a low carbon manner. Another example of this, of policies that are leading us towards or helping our buildings be the climate change champions that we need them to be, is the San Francisco, Santa Monica, and a number of other jurisdictions are requiring solar panels on new buildings as part of their all new developments. I did also want to highlight that the National Model Building Code is being adopted for the first time under the energy efficiency, and it's going to require a stepped approach that's looking at net zero energy target as the goal by the step 5, and that's the goal for 2030 as part of the Pan-Canadian framework. But in order for us to achieve that goal by 2030, we need to be testing out exactly what we need to be doing, advancing low carbon opportunities. And yes, it is absolutely much easier to do this right at the beginning of the planning and design stage. So new buildings are a no-brainer in being able to apply them for lower carbon opportunities. But absolutely, we cannot expect just new buildings, because most of our stock that's here right now, almost 80% of it is going to be here in 2050. We also have to address the energy efficiency and greenhouse gas of existing buildings as well. But I did want to highlight that new buildings are an absolute no-brainer in terms of being able to advance us towards the direction we need them to be. So as part of this, one of the things we've been doing is working with municipalities to address some of the kind of collective barriers and issues and challenges they have with regards to green standards, how they work with the development community, what kind of questions and issues, and really viable, like really important issues, that how to create a level playing field between those advanced environmental and climate change performance buildings and then the same old status quo energy planning that takes place in certain developments. How do we build in that to level the playing field and be a more conducive environment to enabling developers to act on the climate change opportunities right from the beginning of their design and construction planning process? So I wanted to highlight some of the work that's taking place within municipalities, how important buildings are to our climate change solution, and that we will not address the GHGs and climate targets that we have in front of us without addressing emissions from the building sector, and how we all need to work together on all hands on deck, because this is a really, really challenging endeavor in front of us, but also a really good opportunity for building local capacity, because these are great jobs that will need to be filled locally. They cannot be outsourced. And it really means that all of the energy efficiency goals that we advance will result in local economic development, whereas spending on energy pretty much all just leaves our community and goes to the United States and out west. So there's a real local economic development opportunity associated with these lower carbon communities that we need to build. So I'll stop there, and I just will open up to the discussions.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Certainly, I think that's it's an important topic for us to have our eyes on, for sure. Given that I know, like, one of our main buyers is municipalities, and these green standards and green development standards certainly stand to affect materials that go into these buildings, and how that looks beyond 2030, right? So there are some questions that certainly come up, and recently, and I think this is how we got connected, is we've been working with or talking with municipalities that have endeavored into these green development standards through, whether it be through the first declaration of a climate emergency or just going to it in general. So and just in terms of the green development standards, maybe we can dig into that a little bit more. I know there are some municipalities that are quite advanced on it. Do you know, or maybe you did mention, how many municipalities have it or are in the process of development?
Yeah, so there's, as I was saying, there's two different types of green development standards in place. Right now, Toronto and Whitby have a mandatory tiered approach, which tier 1 is mandatory, and then the goal is to be in tier 4 by 2030. And each couple of years, the green standards gets updated. There's the other one that we have with about 4 other jurisdictions. So that would bring us to about 6 municipalities that have implemented green development standards. But the menu approach that's used in Richmond Hill, Vaughan, Brampton, and Halton Hills really kind of outlines all the 30 different metrics, and each metric is allocated a point score. And then the development has to achieve a minimum threshold point score to proceed through the development application process. But it's up to the developer to determine which of the metrics best kind of fit with their development and which ones they're going to voluntarily uptake.
Right. So, and I guess at that point, there's a certain baseline that contributes to the to that. So I know with City of Toronto, their Green Standard version 4 is coming out next year, and they said they're going to start looking to have 20% off the baseline. So they're gathering baseline information right now. What advice do you have, or what can you tell the industry now that in terms of getting that baseline info to a municipality, and when the municipality asks, why is it important to get that baseline info to them, and for those that within the industry that might be hesitant to give that, why shouldn't they be?
So one of the interesting things taking place thus far, the metrics haven't really dug into embodied carbon. They've always been looking at operational carbon, like how much energy is coming into the building to meet the energy needs from the energy system as a whole. Embodied carbon, which means it's the carbon that is associated with the production of materials that get used in the building, is something that has been starting to build a lot more awareness, but there hasn't been an easily accessible manner for the development community to really understand what is the embodied carbon of the different products I would use. And thankfully, there's been some, and that was a huge gap. Like, you can't expect people to know what their embodied carbon is associated with different materials, and if that information is not easily accessible. So ultimately, what we had to do is make sure that that information on how much carbon is associated with different materials really is easily accessible, so that it can be brought into decision making in an easy manner. I did want to kind of highlight one of the areas that's taking place on this is there's Builders for Climate Action. I'm going to throw that kind of website in the chat. That has been really helping to kind of build the capacity amongst the development community and all the various sectors associated with it to understand the embodied carbon associated with different material choices. I would really encourage folks, there's a lot more information on Part 9 buildings than there would be on, Part 3 in the MERV sort of building stock. But that is something that's kind of being advanced. So municipalities are looking at associated with how to bring embodied carbon into their green development standards. And I would really encourage everyone to start kind of thinking about, like, the materials. What is the embodied carbon associated with the supply chain and of the different materials? And are there easy change outs that can be made that can reduce the embodied carbon that is associated with the materials that you're using?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a number of questions in the chat and the Q&A. I'll move on to that in a second, but I think that kind of leads us into the issue of EPDs and the whole world of EPDs, right? And I think moving forward, there are EPDs available. Can you identify why a site or material specific EPD will become more important than an industry average?
Largely because this information is really, people are really starting to, as they're doing some digging into the embodied carbon calculations. And I did notice there's a question in there with regards to vinyl siding that was used in one of the net zero developments. I did want to kind of highlight that that development did not take embodied carbon into consideration. It was largely only looking at operational carbon. And that's one of the issues that we've identified as a gap. We have to start bringing in embodied carbon into calculations more. So I think that's one of the kind of key areas is kind of understanding from the masonry sector, what is the embodied carbon? Like, how does the embodied carbon associated with the supply chain really factor into the decision making? And if you're comparing it across vinyl siding, what is the difference? And those are the kind of areas that people are asking questions that we don't have necessarily readily information. And hence the reason why these kind of like collective efforts to bring embodied carbon into and provide open information on embodied carbon calculations comes into decision making. Because if people can't access this information, it's not going to be brought into the decision making. We really got to create a lot more transparency related to embodied carbon, and that can enable people to bring that into consideration.
Right. And I guess that kind of moves into the life cycle. So, a higher embodied carbon that will last 80 years as opposed to a fraction of that, but has to be replaced every 15. Right. So I guess what I'm hearing is that this type of data would be happily accepted by our stakeholders and targeted audiences out there and utilized should it be impartial.
Absolutely. Absolutely. there is a drought of all of this open, transparent data out there that we need to do better to provide that to the sector to actually figure out embodied carbon as part of their overall calculations. Because I can assure you, as challenging as it is to get operational GHGs and greenhouse gas and carbon emissions factored in, it's eating another level to bring the embodied carbon into it. But there's a lot of growing awareness, and people are looking for easy ways to bring this into their decision making. Because it's not like everybody's like, oh yeah, I want to build as much carbon in the system as well. We just don't take it into in our decision making because we don't have the easily accessible data associated with it.
All right, so I've got two questions here from Armstrong Strategy Group. So the first one is, you have a lot of municipal partners in the partnership. Can you talk about the interest in your organization from the municipal sector? And the second one, how should the end of cycle use be factored into decision making? That is deconstruction versus demolition.
Yeah, I think that everything I've seen, I'll go back into the second question because I can remember it better than I can the first question right now. But from certainly end of life and bringing that into its calculations, there is no doubt about it that retrofitting an existing building will reduce your embodied carbon associated with it, rather than like leveling the place and building from scratch. I've never seen any calculations that has decided that. So when you bring embodied carbon into the calculations, it really does help to build the case for retrofitting existing building stock. And existing building stock is going to be a huge challenge for us, but what a huge opportunity as well. Because right now, this type of work in terms of retrofitting from an operational perspective on taking energy use into consideration is not happening to the extent that we need it to happen to actually address the greenhouse gas emissions from the sector. So everything going into the future that we do will actually help from an economic development in terms of local economic development and opportunities for retrofitting these existing buildings. One of the things that we've seen a lot of taking place on this one is, again, retrofit is also suffering from the same challenges in bringing embodied carbon into its decision making. So we're working with a number of municipalities to advance home energy efficiency retrofit programs that provide financing that loan money to the homeowners that enables them to do these energy efficiency retrofits and save from operational. But we also want to ensure that those homeowners are also taking embodied carbon into consideration. So if you're looking at it from a perspective of spray foam insulation, when you look at it from the perspective of operational savings, it looks good. But when you bring embodied carbon into calculations for spray foam insulation, it doesn't look so good anymore from a climate change perspective. So the question is, do we not allow that as an eligible measure because of the fact that we've taken embodied carbon into considerations, and there are other more natural insulation opportunities that when you bring embodied carbon into the calculation are the winners, no hands, like they win down. Like there is nothing that's better for it from a GHG perspective when you bring that embodied carbon into calculations. Having said that, a lot of homeowners wouldn't have the literacy to take those embodied carbon into their decision making. So there's a real need for the municipalities as part of these programs to do the education and handholding to help homeowners manage the retrofits. And trades are in an ideal position to help their customers navigate this kind of complicated world of energy efficiency retrofits and enabling them to bring embodied carbon into their calculations. So yeah, and the other area that we're really trying to do is certainly how do you, let's just say it is an example as this work is taking place, it's a really good opportunity to engage customers on how climate change factors into their homes. As they're doing upgrades, it's a really great opportunity in terms of managing structural or aesthetic things on the exterior of the home. What a great opportunity that is to engage homeowners on their energy efficiency opportunities. And that's another kind of question is, how can this diversify some opportunities for different trades to build a more diversity in their customer base that can then help them to do these energy efficiency retrofits?
Right, so definitely like a very holistic view to what needs to happen, which is great. I think And I think a lot of the building sector should hear this because I think a lot of the times we get tunnel vision, right? So certainly,
we have such an endeavor in front of us that we need really like all hands on deck on this one.
Mhm. So just to circle back to Mark's question, because I know we touched on it a little bit. So he says, I noticed the net zero homes in the photo were heavily sided. So I know that you said that they didn't reach the.
Yeah, they didn't take embodied carbon into
Right.
calculations in their that they were looking at it from it strictly from an operational basis.
Yeah. So masonry absorbs water without degradation, reduces stormwater load. So I guess the question really is, I mean, our municipalities, are we looking at durable and I guess durable net zero design? I guess the one thing it's one thing to hit those targets, and the adaptation is as important as mitigation. So if we have a weaker building stock, what are kind of some of the thoughts on that?
Certainly, I think one of the things we have a flooding issue happening in our urban areas, and not only as a result of climate change, but the more intense storms that we're seeing and we're going to see into the future are definitely a flooding risk for our communities and for our homes. And I think that's one opportunity to also engage with the customers as well as they're doing this work and trying to understand how can homeowners do do more to protect their home from flooding occurrences. What are the opportunities for them to do that? I can think of certainly, when we've done some work with Intact Center and looking at reducing flood risk around a building, there's a lot of opportunities for how that can take place in terms of grading, in terms of downspout disconnects, in terms of sun pumps. There's certainly an element on that one. Like how can businesses diversify, not just to provide masonry, but also to provide flood risk reduction opportunities for homeowners? That's another question that's really kind of we're raising on this one. For the longest time, we haven't had that kind of diversification taking place across different trades and trades because of the fact that it's like we've suffered from this. Like we've worked in our silos. We're all guilty of this. And it's because the silos have worked for us for a period of time. And because we specialized in so many different areas, the silos have worked in the past. I would have to say that I don't believe the silos will work for us into the future. And we really need to kind of identify the synergies and interdependencies across each of our different sectors and each of our different trades to understand how the work we do fits into the bigger picture of what we need our buildings and our communities to achieve in order to rise to the challenge ahead of us on climate change.
And Dr. Mark Hales, thanks for the clarification there. So, well, I guess, and as we move to that, I guess it kind of brings me into the viability and scaling up of net zero. We know that the 2030 target is there. We're 9 years out from that, right? And I think a lot of the changes that need to take place are going to come really fast when they do start coming. So I know you said that's kind of it's an upfront cost of 20,000. There's a couple of questions that pop up for me there. I mean, obviously with affordability, and we know everyone knows the housing crisis that we're going through in Ontario. So I think scaling it to get to somewhere cheaper, and I think also the provincial, like in terms of energy code here in the province, we're still on NECV 2011, right? So we're still, a lot of the big builders are still building to that standard. When does that switch flip?
So right? It's interesting. So the National Model Building Code is exactly that. It's a model building code, but building codes are actually implemented at the provincial level. So in order for the National Model Code to serve what it intends to achieve, a province needs to adopt that standard. Right now, we're probably at about step two and a half of the National Model Building Code in terms of energy efficiency. So the question is really, in order for Ontario to advance the direction that we need to adopt this National Model Building Code at a minimum at the standard that it is set for us already. So let's just say 2.5 is where it is. And then set the time period for when the market is needing to kind of expected to meet the higher tiered standards along the way. that is kind of that's the process that needs to happen to enact the national model code to be implemented within our provinces and territories, because building code is provincial jurisdiction and not federal jurisdiction.
So if you had a crystal ball, putting you on the spot here, when do you foresee that happening in Ontario? Because I mean, obviously the industry's got to adapt really quick.
Yeah, well, I think that it's really important for the industry to adapt regardless of the time frame for when the province is going. I mean, I can't say I know that when the province is going to adopt the national model building code. I can put my wish out there, but it's meaningless from that perspective. It really is going to do consultations with the sector to understand when and how can it meet. It knows it's already, led meeting like 2.5. When would it be the appropriate time to set step 3 as the code for the province of Ontario? So I don't necessarily have that information on when the province is thinking of this. They did say, and they did indicate that they want to align with the national model building code to keep it consistent. But it does show you exactly where the market is going. And it's really important to keep ahead of the market and to try and build the capacity within your business to reach those higher tiers, because it is eventually coming at some point in time. I just don't know. I couldn't give that indication. I wish I had that crystal ball or the magic wand to make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah, if we all had a crystal ball and a magic wand,
Yeah.
Life would be much easier. Right? So,
Yeah, it would be.
So the
But
Paris
it goes
Accord,
to show where the sector as a whole is going.
right.
And keep in mind, the National Model Building Code also does not factor in embodied carbon. It's strictly looking at it from an operational perspective. So that to me is a gap, because embodied carbon really does play out a lot in terms of how much the total GHG is associated with construction of new buildings or retrofit of existing buildings.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, for sure. I think we're going to be getting, I'm glad that you're bringing this up, because this is really setting the stage for what we're getting into this afternoon with 2 of our panelists and talking about embodied carbon. So certainly is it worked out good. So here's another question here. The Paris Accord is also calling for new buildings to be deconstructible, i.e. the material used to build a building can be recycled instead of sent to landfill. 30% by 2030 and 50% by 2050. Masonry is 100% recyclable. Have you done any work on that?
No. And we haven't done end of the supply chain, what happens with it. I certainly know that LEED standards have tried to bring that in their calculations in the LEED. The net zero carbon standard that the Canada Green Building Council has been advancing is looking at the end of the supply and how materials are repurposed or reused, and bringing that into giving points for that. But it is, again, it's strange, interesting, like we have so much work ahead of us in the building sector in terms of reducing the environmental impacts of building new buildings, retrofitting old buildings, and finding out what happens with products that are no longer being used. How do we reuse them, and how do we keep them out of the waste stream?
Yeah, and circular economy certainly.
Absolutely.
Certainly.
I mean, we can see some of the things happening. I mean, you can look at some, you see a lot of work taking place in the Scandinavian countries, in England, in Germany. New York State is really advancing using prefab to, instead of actually in their social housing sector. One of the things that is an emerging area on that one is, they could raise the place and build new buildings there, but because of the fact that they're trying to reuse material as much as possible, one of the strategies that's being used in a lot of social housing building with very similar archetypes is cladding on the exterior. So you come in, you build a new wall that goes around the existing wall that creates a good vapor barrier, and then you use that as instead of actually just demolishing and rebuilding, you're recladding the buildings to achieve the GHG emissions that you're hoping for, while also recognizing that you don't want to create more embodied carbon and send more materials to landfill.
Right. And I know on the west coast of the United States, Seattle and Portland in particular, they do have some deconstruction audits or deconstruction policies, which indicates to demolition that for certain buildings that to avert landfill as much as possible. And the municipalities are actually incentivizing developers to do the deconstruction audits and the diversion from landfill by in turn accelerating building permits once that building's down and the redevelopment takes place, because that is the one policy lever a municipality has, or
Absolutely.
kind of the advantage they have is they can slow it down. They can really slow it down, right? And so that's certainly something that we're seeing out west, and a policy that certainly from the masonry standpoint is, I think, something that we would support, given the fact that all of our when it comes to end of life, all of our material can be
it can fit back into the supply chain relatively easily, far easier than many other materials can.
Yeah, exactly. So here's another question: how feasible is retrofitting broadly? We've seen jurisdictions like Calgary. They have problems with moisture infiltration in primarily stucco clad buildings. Is a program of masonry retrofits environmentally and technologically doable? So I think, that's a pretty specific to masonry.
I think it fits in with the whole kind of like how you do it at scale, and which is something that everybody's trying to figure out, because we know that right now, for the most part, the retrofits that are taking place are one-off, customized to meet the needs of the specific building. How do you streamline this to do kind of like, I call it the Model T version? We won't win this doing these one-off kind of retrofits. We have to do this at scale. So the question then comes into it, but there's an element of like building the policy environment that's supportive of that. I see home energy labeling is really, really important. Can we get, like, this is really important from the perspective of like, protecting purchasers from risks associated with buildings, which is what we do under normal circumstances with house inspections, structural issues. People need to know what that's related to, how much of the operational and, when are the improvements I'm going to need to make to my building. So I see that as a really good opportunity that as we do this work, can we streamline this for customers to reduce the costs of these retrofits and achieve the environmental performance that we need them to achieve, but at a scaled up version, and to reduce the burden on homeowners to manage these retrofits.
Right.
Because it's taking on a part-time job, like, as you know, like it's a lot of work to take this on to manage a retrofit.
Well, and the scale of it is absolutely
mind-boggling.
Right. So I mean, for one thing, as a homeowner, you see it, right? I mean, and you can kind of say, but the city of Toronto, in their public housing sector has almost $2 billion worth of maintenance backlogs, let alone retrofitting. Right. Yeah. So how is that addressed, and like how do we what can industry do to help out there, right?
Well, I think that's like the repackaging of everything. Again, it goes back to not thinking only things in silos. So if you're looking at it from the structural kind of aspects of water infiltration and mildew issues, when for, let's say, correcting the masonry around the building, that is all about the conversation about the integrity of the building envelope and how important the building envelope is, not just to protecting from water infiltration, but also with regards to the energy use and the heat loss from the cooling loss from that building envelope. Is there an area where there's an opportunity? The homeowners and this whole building sector is going to need a lot of advice, and a lot of objective advice, because the one thing they want to avoid is getting shoddy retrofits happening where there are mildew issues that are created because of lack of building science amongst the trades in terms of how this vapor barrier is really critically important to ensuring the healthiness of a home while also addressing the GHG emissions. So it's kind of like, maybe it's some kind of things like, we need the workforce for retrofitting buildings. It's nowhere near where it needs to be to meet the challenge ahead of us. Now it's a chicken and egg thing. There isn't as much demand. How can you expect the market to meet something where they don't feel that they're getting that demand from their customers? But I think that there's this element that we need to kind of work on with building the customer awareness, building the customer literacy on how important energy efficiency is and how they can make their home be a climate change champion. But they don't have this information on their own. They're looking to their contractors and trades sector to give them that information. In addition, we also need to get municipalities to get these programs into place to reduce the burden of upfront capital costs associated with this work. So I think that's kind of like repackaging it. And that's one of the things we've also heard from the social housing sector is you can't go in there talking to people about energy efficiency when there's structural issues that need to get dealt with. The structural issues need to get dealt with before anything else, right? But it's like, why would you do it in piecemeal manner? If you're going to be dealing with structural issues, how come that's not an opportunity to open up the conversation on the other things that need to be done for a good overall state of good repair?
Yeah, it's a big scope. And I think also like mobilizing the private sector to do it is certainly difficult given the demand for new housing here. I mean, they're just going to get pulled into
Absolutely.
that market because that's where the money is, right?
And that's where that's where the demand is at present. I mean, never mind, we have a shortage in the new building sector in terms of trades that can meet that demand. Never mind when we kind of advance the retrofit market. That's going to be an issue. I do believe that's a temporary issue. As demand grows, the market will respond to that demand. But I think those who are kind of ready and to go at the beginning will have an advantage. Because there is going to be a gap between when that demand comes in and when the market can meet that demand.
Right. So another question here. You have a lot of municipal partners in the partnership. Can you talk about the interest in your organization from the municipal sector and how much momentum is there?
Yeah, I'd certainly say, I mean, I've been in this sector a fair amount of time. I would say that, when I first started out, it was trying to get them to listen to that this is something that they should be paying attention to. I don't find that anymore. It's not a matter of convincing people that they should be paying attention to this. Everybody knows that they should be paying attention to this. It's more about the how. How do we handle, how do we advance and meet the challenge that's coming our way? And that is our way, actually. So how I think that kind of conversation on the how we go about working with the municipalities is they are also do not have anywhere near the capacity to meet this challenge at present. So we really need to be very, very efficient with their time and effort as well. So as part of that, one of the things that we really try and do is as each municipality advances a clean air climate change initiative, we get them to share what they've done with all the other municipalities. And then we ask the question, if one of you guys can do it, what would stop all of you from doing it? And there are issues and there are barriers. And so we put the collective brain power together to address those issues, pool resources, so we're not working in isolation across each of the different municipalities. And then that means that as each municipality advances an action, they share their learnings and experiences and warnings with other municipalities so that we can each build on each other's efforts and we don't have to duplicate the wheel over and over and over again because we just don't have time to do that anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for anyone within the industry that's thinking, within our industry that's thinking that this is just going to pass over, it's here, right? The municipality, these are our customers and they're here and it's here. Yeah. Sorry.
As much as I would love for the climate change deniers to be right, I don't want climate change to be right. I would love them. But on the off chance that, they're wrong and those thousands upon thousands of scientists are right, we have a huge challenge ahead of us, but also a really huge opportunity to build new service areas that we need to help residents reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And we all need to play a role in making that opportunity available to everyone.
Absolutely. So with that, I mean, how can private industry or private sector help support the work of the Clean Air Partnership?
Well, I think one of the things we've also been kind of working together on a retrofit training network because we recognize there is a huge gap in terms of the retrofit training network, the skills and trades we need to advance towards building science and energy efficiency and embodied carbon. So I would really love to kind of engage with the conversation. It's like, okay, what are the opportunities for the masonry sector to get into the energy efficiency embodied carbon calculations? how do we get those conversations happening across your sector with the municipalities, with the retrofit training network to help figure out how do we break down the silos that we need to break down to get all of us to share our expertise where we have it, and then collectively, how can we work better together? Because that's the one thing I have learned, that unless we work together on this one, it's going to be a lot harder than it needs to be, and it's already hard enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, certainly, I hope this is just the beginning of many conversations that we'll have, and I think engaging with the Clean Air Partnership is something that valuable for the industry, particularly.
Absolutely, we'd be happy to engage in conversation, bring municipalities like that. Those are that we're part of here to kind of foster the dialogue across different sectors.
Fantastic. So I think we're at 5 minutes to 12 here. Is there any other questions for Gabby before we take a lunch break for an hour? Looks like we got them all out. So Gabby, thank you so much for your time.
No problem. Thanks so much for the opportunity, Andrew, and thank you everybody for your time. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Enjoy lunch.
Yeah, thanks. So with that, we'll take a quick well, not a quick lunch break. We'll be back at 1 o'clock. So again, get up, stretch your legs, grab a coffee, and meet back here.